In the spring of 1815, London stood at a moment of particular tension within the social order of the capital. The conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars had brought relief from external threat, yet within the city itself, anxieties persisted regarding the conduct and loyalty of those in domestic service. Households of standing depended upon the labor of servants drawn from the lower ranks, and the question of trust between employer and employee occupied a position of acute concern. It was understood that cooks, maids, and other household workers moved through private spaces with unusual access to food, belongings, and the intimate arrangements of family life. This proximity was necessary, yet it carried with it a persistent unease, particularly in periods when political discontent and ideas of equality were discussed openly in certain quarters. The legal system of the time reflected these concerns. Trials involving servants accused of crimes against their employers were conducted with formality, yet the balance of power within the courtroom was rarely in question. Those of property and professional standing commanded resources, contacts, and credibility that were not available to working people. Representation was costly, and the quality of legal defense varied greatly according to means. At the same time, the use of capital punishment remained widespread. Execution was applied not only to cases of deliberate murder, but also to offenses that would later be regarded with less severity. The machinery of justice, once set in motion, was difficult to redirect, and appeals for clemency depended upon the discretion of officials whose judgments were influenced by considerations of class, reputation, and personal conviction. It was within this setting where domestic service placed women in positions of both necessity and suspicion, and where the law operated with limited safeguards for the accused, that the case of Eliza Fenning came before the courts. Eliza Fenning was born in the year 1793, the daughter of William Fenning, a man employed in modest circumstances within the potato trade in the district of Holborn. Her upbringing was that of a working family, respectable but without property or influence. From an early age, she was expected to contribute to her own support, and by her late teenage years, she had entered domestic service, a common occupation for young women of her position. Those who knew her in these years later described her as lively in manner, industrious, and generally well regarded by those she worked for. She was said to take satisfaction in her duties and to show particular interest in the preparation of food, expressing a desire to demonstrate skill in cooking when the opportunity arose. In the early months of 1815, Eliza was employed as a cook in the household of Orlibar Turner, a law stationer residing at number 68 Chancery Lane. Turner's occupation placed him within the professional circles of the legal district, and his household was maintained according to the expectations of his standing. He lived there with his wife, Margaret, his son, Robert, and his daughter-in-law, Charlotte. The household also included a maid, Sarah Peer, and 2 apprentices who were engaged in Turner's trade. The dwelling was typical of its kind, with separate spaces for family and servants, and a kitchen where the preparation of meals was carried out under the supervision of the cook. Eliza's position required her to work closely with the other servants and to receive direction from the women of the household, particularly Charlotte Turner, who took an active role in domestic management. At first, Eliza's service appeared to proceed without incident. However, in the weeks preceding the events that would come to define her case, a matter of conduct arose between Eliza and Charlotte Turner. Eliza had entered the room occupied by the apprentices in order to borrow a candle, a small and ordinary task, but her dress at the time was judged by Charlotte to be inappropriate for such an errand. A reprimand was delivered, and the threat of dismissal was made. The exchange was witnessed by Sarah Peer, to whom Eliza afterward expressed distress and stated that she no longer felt the same regard for her mistress as she had before. The incident was not pursued further at the time, and outwardly the household continued as before. Yet the matter was not forgotten, and it would later be recalled and given weight in the proceedings that followed. On the 21st of March, 1815, Eliza expressed a wish to prepare dumplings for the family's dinner. She had spoken of this before, but Charlotte had declined to permit it. On this occasion, however, Eliza took the initiative to arrange for yeast to be delivered by the brewer, and Charlotte, perhaps moved by this preparation, agreed that dumplings could be served alongside steak and potatoes. Eliza was also instructed to prepare a steak pie for the apprentices, who ate at an earlier hour. The work began in the morning. Eliza prepared the pie and set it aside to be taken to the baker's for cooking, as was customary in households without sufficient ovens. She also prepared the dumplings, mixing the ingredients and setting the dough by the fire to rise while she attended to other tasks. The apprentices ate their meal at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The family was to dine at 3. When Eliza returned from the baker's, she observed that the dumplings had not risen as expected. Their appearance was poor, and she appears to have made some attempt to remedy the situation, though without success. When the time came to serve the meal, she brought 6 dumplings to the table. They were small, dark in color, and heavy in texture. Nevertheless, the family ate them. Eliza herself also consumed a portion. The effects were immediate and severe. Charlotte Turner was the first to show symptoms. She experienced excruciating pain and began to vomit. Her husband Robert and her father-in-law Orlebar also became ill shortly thereafter. Eliza herself was stricken with similar symptoms. One of the apprentices, Roger Gadsden, who had picked at the dumplings in the kitchen after the family had finished, also fell ill, though less severely. A surgeon, Henry Ogilvy, was sent for without delay. Shortly afterward, a second medical man, John Marshall, arrived to assist. The household was thrown into disorder. Eliza, though suffering herself, asked Sarah Peer to fetch her father from his place of work in Red Lion Street. Sarah went, but did not convey any sense of urgency, and made no mention of the sickness in the house. William Fenning, occupied with his duties, did not respond immediately, and the message was forgotten until later in the day. Between 9 and 10 o'clock that evening, he arrived at the house in Chancery Lane and knocked at the door. Sarah Peer answered, and acting on instructions she later claimed to have received from her mistress, told him that Eliza was out on an errand. William Fenning left without being informed that his daughter, along with 4 others, had been poisoned. By the following day, the family had begun to recover. The quantities consumed had not been sufficient to cause death, though the distress had been considerable. Orlebar Turner, once he was able to move about, took steps to investigate the source of the illness. He retained the basin in which the dumplings had been prepared and showed it to John Marshall, the surgeon. Marshall added water to the residue, stirred it, and examined the sediment that settled at the bottom. He identified a white powder, which tarnished a knife when brought into contact with it. He concluded that the substance was arsenic and stated this with certainty. He did not, however, detect arsenic in the yeast or in the flour that had been used. Attention turned immediately to Eliza. She had prepared the dumplings, and she was the only member of the household who had access to the ingredients throughout the process. Despite the fact that she herself had been ill, she was taken before a magistrate and committed to Clerkenwell Prison to await trial. When William and his wife finally learned of their daughter's situation, they gathered what resources they could. They raised £5, a considerable sum for a family of their means. 2 guineas were paid to a defense attorney, Mr. Alley, and the remainder went to a solicitor who prepared the brief. This was the full extent of the legal assistance available to Eliza. Against her stood the Turner family, with their connections to the legal profession, their knowledge of procedure, and their means to secure representation and influence. The prosecution was conducted by individuals who had personal and professional ties to the Turners. The solicitor acting for the family also served as clerk to the magistrate who had committed Eliza to trial.
a circumstance that would later be noted but not challenged. The trial opened at the Central Criminal Court, commonly known as the Old Bailey, on the 11th of April, 1815. The presiding judge was John Sylvester, the Recorder of London, a man known for the severity of his judgments and for a particular harshness in cases involving women. The courtroom was full, and the case attracted considerable attention. The charge was attempted murder by poisoning, a capital offense. The case presented by the prosecution rested entirely upon circumstantial evidence. No witness had observed Eliza placing any substance into the dumplings. Instead, the argument was constructed around her behavior, her opportunity, and her supposed motive.
It was stated that she had been reprimanded by Charlotte Turner and had expressed resentment afterward. It was suggested that this resentment had festered and that she had planned revenge. The means, it was argued, had been readily available. Orlebar Turner kept 2 packets of arsenic in a drawer in the office where the apprentices worked. The packets were tied tightly and labeled clearly as deadly poison. The drawer was not locked. The arsenic was used to kill rats and mice that damaged the parchment and vellum used in the stationer's trade. 2 weeks before the poisoning, Turner had noticed that the arsenic was missing. The drawer also contained scraps of paper, which the servants used for lighting fires. Roger Gadsden, one of the apprentices, testified that he had seen Eliza take paper from this drawer. The implication was clear. She had seen the arsenic and taken it. When questioned, Eliza stated that she had always asked for paper when she needed it and had never taken anything without permission. She asked that Thomas King, the other apprentice, be called to confirm her account. The request was denied. Henry Ogilvy, the first surgeon to attend the household, who could have testified that Eliza herself had been gravely ill, was not called as a witness. Eliza's defense was minimal. Mr. Alley, the attorney her parents had hired, spoke briefly and was not present in the courtroom when the recorder delivered his summing up. One of the jurymen was later reported to be deaf. Eliza was permitted to address the court in her own defense, but only briefly. She stood and spoke plainly. "I am truly innocent of the whole charge. I am innocent. Indeed, I am. I liked my place. I was very comfortable." She called 5 witnesses to speak to her character. Each testified that she was honest, hard-working, and of good reputation. During the proceedings, William Fenning attempted to submit a sworn statement to the court. In the afternoon of the 11th of April, he and a companion had entered the Pitt's Head public house opposite the Old Bailey. William's hands shook so violently from distress that he could not write. His companion tried to assist, but was equally unable. Eventually, William asked a stranger to help him set down the words, "I want to tell the court that my daughter Eliza told me she was happy in her situation." He believed this simple statement to be crucial. He crossed the street and attempted to have it entered into evidence. The court refused to accept it. The verdict was delivered without long deliberation. The jury found Eliza Fenning guilty of attempted murder. The announcement was met with shock, not only by Eliza and her family, but by many who had followed the case. In the days that followed, efforts were made to secure a reprieve. Petitions were addressed to the Home Secretary, Lord Sidmouth, and to the Prince Regent. Letters were written to the Times, though none were published. Basil Montague, a prominent Quaker and legal reformer, uncovered evidence that Robert Turner had previously suffered an episode of mental instability. He had appeared, according to witnesses, wild and deranged, and had made threats against his wife and himself. Montague believed this information could explain the illness in the household without implicating Eliza. He sent his findings to John Sylvester, who dismissed them as wholly useless. An anonymous chemist, moved by doubts regarding the case, conducted experiments of his own. He prepared dumplings with arsenic added to the mixture. The arsenic had no effect on whether the dumplings rose or failed to rise. He asked his own cook to prepare dumplings and then, without her knowledge, added arsenic to them after they were made. No visible change in consistency or color was observed. Convinced that Eliza had been wrongly convicted, the chemist visited the Turner household in an attempt to persuade them to support a petition for reprieve. He was making some progress with Orlebar Turner when John Sylvester, the recorder, entered the house. In the presence of Sylvester and Robert Turner, Orlebar was persuaded not to sign the petition. The execution was scheduled for the 26th of July, 1815. All efforts to prevent it had failed. On the morning of the 26th of July, Eliza rose at 4 o'clock. She washed and gave a lock of her hair to each of the attendants who had been assigned to her. She prayed until 7 and then dressed for the occasion. She was reported to have said, "I wish to leave the world. It is all vanity and vexation of spirit, but it is a cruel thing to die innocently. Yet I freely forgive everyone and die in charity with all the world, but cannot forget my injured innocence." She looked through the window at the other prisoners who had been locked in their cells but had climbed to the windows to see her pass. "Goodbye, goodbye to all of you," she called. She was dressed in a white muslin gown, a muslin cap, and pale lilac boots laced in front. Her arms were bound. She mounted the scaffold before a crowd estimated at 50,000. Her last words, spoken before the drop, were, "I am innocent." 2 others were executed after her, a man convicted of raping a child and a man convicted of sodomy. Among the crowd was William Hone, a writer and journalist known for his defense of press freedom and his advocacy for the oppressed. He later wrote, "I got into an immense crowd that carried me along with them against my will. At length I found myself under the gallows where Eliza Fenning was to be hanged. I had the greatest horror of witnessing an execution, and of this particular execution, a young girl of whose guilt I had grave doubts. But I could not help myself. I was closely wedged in. She was brought out. I saw nothing, but I heard all. I heard her protesting her innocence. I heard the prayer. I could hear no more. I stopped my ears and knew nothing else till I found myself in the dispersing crowd and far from that dreadful spot." After the execution, Eliza's parents were required to pay 14 shillings and sixpence to recover her body. They had to borrow the money. Her only possession, a Bible, was bequeathed to her mother. On the 31st of July, she was buried at St. George the Martyr, near Brunswick Square. 100 mourners attended, and many others attempted to gain entry. In the days that followed, anger spread through the poorer districts of London. A crowd of 1,000 gathered outside the Turner House in Chancery Lane. Some were arrested for behaving in a riotous and tumultuous manner. Police from Bow Street were stationed outside the house for several days. William Hone, who had witnessed Eliza's death, was commissioned by the publisher John Watkins to investigate the case. He gathered evidence and reviewed the records of the trial. He found that the Sessions report was incomplete, with large sections missing. His publication, The Important Results of an Elaborate Investigation into the Mysterious Case of Elizabeth Fenning, detailed the flaws in the trial and the efforts taken by officials to ensure that Eliza was executed. He documented John Sylvester's extraordinary intervention with Orlebar Turner and Basil Montague's investigation into Robert Turner's mental ill health. The publication itself became a subject of controversy. Sylvester and the legal establishment sought to defend their conduct. The Observer took the lead in attacking Hone's account, and its allegations were repeated in newspapers across the country. The Fennings were falsely described as Roman Catholics and as Irish. It was claimed that they had displayed Eliza's body for money and that William Fenning had urged his daughter to protest her innocence only to preserve his own reputation. These allegations were printed as handbills and distributed through letterboxes and pasted in shop windows. John Marshall and Henry Ogilvy, the surgeons who had attended the household, claimed that Eliza had refused medical treatment because she knew her plan had failed. She would much rather die than live, as life was of no consequence to her, they said. The case of Eliza Fenning continued to be discussed in legal and scientific circles for years afterward. Questions were raised regarding the reliability of the evidence. Did arsenic truly blacken knives in the manner described? Was John Marshall's testimony accurate and impartial? To what extent had collusion between the judge, the prosecutors, and the witnesses shaped the outcome? For the crowds of working Londoners who had watched Eliza die, these questions were secondary. They believed that a defenseless working woman had been judicially murdered, and their anger was directed not at abstract failures of procedure, but at the individuals and institutions responsible. In 1825, Orlibert Turner was declared bankrupt. In 1828, John Gordon Smith, the first professor of medical jurisprudence at the University of London, noted a claim in the Morning Journal that a son of Orlibert Turner had died in Ipswich workhouse, confessing that he had put arsenic in the dumplings. No evidence has been found to confirm this claim, though Robert Turner was recorded as living in Ipswich in 1820. On the 21st of June, 1829, the Examiner noted that William Fenning, Eliza's father, was still living in London. The unfortunate girl was his favorite child, the paper reported. A William Fenning died in Holborn in 1842. If this was Eliza's father, he would have been 91 years old. The record of Eliza Fenning's trial and execution remains in the archives. The questions it raised regarding class, evidence, and the administration of justice were not resolved by her death. The file is closed in law. Its meaning, however, remains open to examination by those who return to its pages.